They say I was mad when I burned 10 years of savings on a dying wolf. But they didn't know that Wolf was a king. The stench hit me first. It always did in this part of Greystone where the cobblestone streets dissolved into mud and the king's laws faded to whispers. The Market of the Dam sprawled across the southern edge of the city like a festering wound hidden behind warehouses and forgotten temples. Here in the shadows of crumbling stone buildings, everything was traded. That decent people refused to name aloud. Stolen goods, forbidden artifacts, living things. I pulled my threadbare cloak tighter around my shoulders, keeping my eyes on the ground. The fabric was thin, patched in three places with mismatched scraps from Madame Brennan's shop. It did little against the autumn wind that swept down from the mountains, carrying with it the smell of the sea and something darker. Despair, perhaps. Fear so thick you could taste it on your tongue like copper. I should never have come here. My usual route home from the tailor shop had been blocked by a landslide, the guard said. Heavy rains had loosened the cliff face above Merchants Row, sending tons of rock and mud cascading down onto the main road. It would be days before the King's engineers cleared it. Take the eastern detour, they told me. Just a small detour. But that detour led directly past the market. I walked faster, my worn leather boots splashing through puddles whose contents I preferred not to identify. The narrow alley between the old fishmonger's warehouse and the abandoned chapel was barely wide enough for two people to pass. Torchlight flickered against wet stone walls, casting dancing shadows that seemed almost alive. Ahead, I could hear the sounds of the market, weeping, pleading, the cruel laughter of buyers haggling over the value of human lives, with the same indifference they might show when purchasing livestock. Just a few hundred more steps, and I would be through. Then I could climb the 5 flights of stairs to my tiny room above the tailor's shop, bolt the door, and pretend this place didn't exist. I had bread and cheese waiting, a small fire in my hearth, my sewing basket with 3 commissioned pieces that needed finishing before the weekend. A simple life, a poor life, but mine. My hand went to the leather purse hidden beneath my cloak, pressing it against my hip. 10 years of savings, 300 gold coins collected 1 copper and silver at a time. Every extra penny, from every piece I'd sewn, every hem I'd shortened, every torn seam I'd mended. It was supposed to buy my freedom. A small cottage in the countryside, far from Greystone's dirt and noise and greedy eyes. A place with a garden where I could grow herbs like my grandmother had taught me. A place where I could finally belong to myself. Soon I told myself, just a few more months, then I heard it. A roar, deep guttural, full of rage and pain at once. It cut through the market's noise like a blade through silk, sharp and impossible to ignore. The sound froze me mid-step, my boot heel hovering above a puddle, every muscle in my body locked. That was not a human sound. That was something wild, something ancient, a sound that made my bones vibrate and my heart stumble in my chest, forgetting its rhythm for one terrible moment. Against all reason, against every instinct of self-preservation my 25 years had taught me, my feet moved on their own. I turned. I followed the sound. The crowd parted before me like water around a stone. Merchants hawking their wares in loud voices. Buyers examining merchandise with cold, calculating eyes. Sellers displaying their goods in cages and on platforms. No one noticed me. I was just another poor seamstress in a threadbare cloak, invisible in this world of wealth and corruption. But then I saw him. The crowd had formed a half circle around a large wooden cart. Mounted on the cart was a cage of rusted iron bars, barely tall enough for a man to stand upright. The cage was small, far too small for the creature inside. And the creature, merciful heaven. It was a wolf, but no ordinary wolf. He was massive, larger than any animal I had ever seen. His shoulders would have reached the height of a tall man, even crouched as he was now. His fur was midnight black, so dark it seemed to absorb the torchlight rather than reflect it. In places, the fur was matted with dried blood and filth. Wounds covered his body. Everywhere I looked, I saw pain. Fresh whip marks crisscrossed his flanks, the flesh beneath torn and weeping. Deep cuts ran along his ribs, some fresh enough that blood still seeped through the dark fur. Brand marks had been burned into his flesh. Cruel symbols I didn't recognize, the skin around them raised and angry. But it was his eyes that held me. They glowed an impossible gold, bright as newly minted coins in the dim afternoon light. Not the yellow of a normal wolf's eyes, but true gold that seemed to burn from within. And they were not the eyes of an animal. There was intelligence there, fury, pride, and a sadness so deep and bottomless that looking into them felt like falling into a well with no bottom. Around his neck lay a heavy iron chain, thick as my wrist. The chain was fastened to the cage floor with a massive lock, giving him barely enough slack to lift his head. His muzzle was enclosed in an iron contraption that fit so tightly I could see the metal cutting into his skin. Blood dripped slowly from his jaw, pooling beneath him in a dark puddle that had soaked into the wooden cart. My stomach cramped. My hand flew to my mouth. This was wrong. This was cruelty beyond measure. Ladies and gentlemen, a voice tore through my paralysis like a slap to the face. I looked up to see the auctioneer, a fat man with an oily smile and eyes as lifeless as a corpse's. He stood beside the cage, one hand resting possessively on the bars. His clothes were fine, expensive, the kind a successful merchant might wear. Velvet doublet and deep purple gold chains around his neck. Blood money, I thought. Suffering and blood money. He clapped his hands together, the sound sharp in the sudden quiet. We now come to today's main attraction. A true specimen of magnificence. He struck the bars with his walking stick. The metallic clang rang out like a bell. The wolf didn't even flinch. He just kept staring straight ahead as if the man didn't exist. As if nothing in this terrible place existed except his own suffering. This killer, the auctioneer continued, his voice dripping with false enthusiasm, was captured in the Shadow Forest 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks, my friends. It took 7 of my best hunters to subdue him. 3 of them didn't survive. The crowd murmured excitedly. Some laughed. I heard whispers around me. Perfect for the arena. But my lord would pay handsomely for such a beast. Imagine it tearing your enemies to pieces. The auctioneer grinned, showing yellowed teeth. Starting bid is 100 gold coins. 100 gold coins. That was more than I earned in 5 years of constant work. 110, someone called from the crowd, a wealthy merchant judging by his fine robes and the rings on his fingers. 150 baht. Another voice, this one belonging to a nobleman I recognized from the upper city. Lord something or other. I'd once mended a cloak for his wife. I should leave. I should turn around right now and walk away. This wasn't my world. I had no gold to spare. I barely had enough to feed myself and pay my rent. What could I possibly do here except bear witness to more cruelty? But then the wolf moved, just slightly. His head turned, and suddenly those burning eyes met mine. The world around me blurred. Sound became distant, as if I were underwater. In that moment, I saw everything. I saw the pride of a king broken and humiliated. I saw the loneliness of a soul that had lost all hope. I saw myself trapped alone and invisible, waiting for someone, anyone, to see me as more than just a tool, an object, a commodity. My hand reached into my pocket without conscious thought. The small leather purse felt heavy, heavier than it should. This was everything I owned. Every dream I'd ever dared to dream. Every plan for a future that didn't involve cold rooms and endless sewing and the contempt of people who thought themselves better than me. 200, the merchant's voice boomed across the market. 250, his rival countered, laughing. The wolf didn't look away from me. It was as if he were looking into my soul, past my threadbare cloak and work-roughened hands, past my fear and uncertainty, seeing something I didn't know existed. And in that piercing gaze, I heard a question. Will you look away like everyone else? My fingers tightened around the purse. The leather was soft, worn from years of being carried close to my body. Inside, I felt the weight of gold coins. Not many, but enough. Enough to represent the last 10 years of my life. Could I really do this? Could I throw away everything I'd worked for on a creature I didn't know for reasons I couldn't explain? 300. The words left my mouth before I fully realized I'd spoken. My voice was quiet, barely more than a whisper, but in the sudden silence that followed, everyone heard. All heads turned toward me. The merchant, the nobleman, the auctioneer, dozens of eyes assessing, judging, finding me lacking. The merchant laughed loudly, the sound harsh and mocking. Did the little mouse just bid? He looked me up and down, taking in my worn cloak, my simple dress, my scuffed boots. Show your gold, girl, or disappear before I have you thrown out for wasting our time. Heat rose to my face, but I forced myself to stand upright. My hands trembled as I raised the leather purse and poured its contents into my palm. Gold coins caught the torchlight gleaming. Not many, not compared to the wealth these men carried. But enough. Enough to represent everything I was and everything I'd hoped to be. The auctioneer stepped closer, his eyes narrowing. He was shorter than me, his belly straining against his velvet doublet. Up close, I could smell wine on his breath and something else, something that smelled like rot. He grabbed one of my coins without asking, bit it with his yellowed teeth to test it, then held it up to the light. After a long moment, he nodded slowly. 300 gold coins, he announced, his voice tinged with surprise and something that might have been respect. From the young lady in gray. Any further bids? The merchant studied me with narrowed eyes. I could see him calculating, weighing the cost against his pride. Then he shrugged. Not for a mangled mutt. Let her have him. She'll learn her lesson soon enough when it tears her throat out. The other bidders murmured in agreement. Already they were losing interest, their attention drawn to the next cage, the next piece of suffering they might purchase for their entertainment. So the auctioneer struck the cage with his stick one final time. The metallic clang made me flinch. To the lady in gray, come forward, my dear, and claim your prize. I stood there for a moment, my empty purse still in my hand, unable to believe what I'd just done. 300 gold coins. Gone. My future, my freedom, my dreams of a cottage in the countryside, all of it traded for a dying wolf I didn't know. What had I done? Come, come, little one. The auctioneer waved me over impatiently. Your beast awaits. On unsteady legs, I stepped closer to the cage. The wolf hadn't taken his eyes off me the entire time. Now up close, he was even more imposing, even more terrifying. His teeth, visible even behind the cruel muzzle, were long as daggers. His claws scraped across the metal floor as he moved slightly, and I heard the sound of them, sharp enough to tear through flesh and bone with ease. He could kill me. Right now, even injured and chained and muzzled, he could kill me before anyone could intervene. But I didn't feel afraid, not exactly. What I felt was something stranger. A recognition, a connection I couldn't name or explain. Here, the auctioneer pressed a heavy key into my hand. His fingers were damp with sweat. This is for the cage lock. And here, a second smaller key. For the chain around his neck. I'd leave the muzzle on if I were you, unless you fancy having your head torn off. He laughed as if it were a joke, but his eyes were serious. Calculating. Want help with transport? He asked. For 10 silver pieces, I'll send a man with you to wherever you're taking this creature. I shook my head. I had no silver left. I had nothing left at all except the clothes on my back and a wolf who would probably kill me before morning. The auctioneer shrugged. Your decision, girl. Your funeral too, most like. He turned away already, calling out to the crowd about the next lot, his interest in me vanishing as quickly as it had appeared. I stood alone before the cage. The market crowd had already dispersed, moving on to the next cruel entertainment, the next transaction in suffering. Around me, I could hear the sounds of commerce continuing, coins changing hands, deals being struck, lives being bought and sold. But in front of me, there was only the wolf and those impossible eyes and the terrible choice I just made. Slowly, very slowly, I knelt before the cage. The mud soaked through my dress, immediately cold and foul, but I didn't care. The wolf growled a deep, warning rumble that made my ribs vibrate. I could feel it in my chest and my bones. I know, I whispered, my voice breaking. I know you're afraid. The growl deepened. I am too, I continued. I'm terrified. I just spent everything I own on you, and I don't know why. I don't know what I'm doing. I extended my hand toward the cage, not to touch him, but to show him it was empty. No weapon, no whip, no tool of torment. Just my hand roughened from years of sewing, scarred from needle pricks and scissor cuts. I promise you, I said, and my voice broke on the words. I won't hurt you. I only want to help. Please, please trust me. He stared at me for a long moment. So long I thought he would simply ignore me, or worse, that he would lunge at the bars when I opened them. Those burning eyes searched my face looking for something. A lie, perhaps. A trick. Some hint that I was no different from the men who had caged him and beaten him and burned their marks into his flesh. Then almost imperceptibly he inclined his head. Just a centimeter, just the smallest acknowledgement. But it was enough. With trembling hands I pushed the key into the cage lock. It was old and rusted, and for a terrible moment I thought it wouldn't turn. I had to use both hands, putting my weight into it, my fingers aching with the effort. Then with a grinding screech of metal on metal, the lock gave way. The cage door swung open. I held my breath. This was it. This was the moment where my madness would cost me everything. The wolf would leap out, would tear me apart, and I would die here in the mud of the market of the damned, having thrown away my life for nothing. But the wolf didn't move. He just watched me unblinking. Come, I whispered, backing away slowly. I gestured toward the edge of the market, toward the streets that would lead us back to my room. Please, it's not far. I have water there. And food. Not much, but something. For an endless moment, nothing happened. Then slowly, so slowly it seemed to take forever, he moved. He was so large he had to duck his head to crawl out of the cage. The chain around his neck rattled as he emerged, each link as thick as my thumb. When he stood fully outside the cage, my breath caught in my throat. He was gigantic. His shoulder reached my chest. Every muscle beneath his torn and bloodied fur was defined, powerful, deadly. This was a creature built to kill, to hunt, to dominate. The chain around his neck seemed almost insulting, a mockery of something so magnificent. He looked toward the street that led away from the market, his ears pricked forward. He could run, I realized. With those long legs, he could be gone in seconds, vanishing into the maze of Greystone's alleys before anyone could stop him. The chain was heavy, but not so heavy he couldn't move. Not so heavy he couldn't escape. But he didn't run. Instead, he turned to me, and once again our gazes met. In his expression, I saw a question, a challenge. "Up the stairs," I said, gesturing toward the narrow alley that led back to the main streets. "My room. It's on the 5th floor. I know it's not much, but it's safe. No one will hurt you there. I swear it." He set himself in motion. Not fast, not aggressive. He moved slowly, carefully, and I saw immediately that he was limping. His left hind leg dragged slightly, and I could see fresh blood seeping through the matted fur. Every step seemed to pain him, but he made no sound, no whimper, no cry. Pride, I thought. Even broken, even suffering, he refused to show weakness. We walked through the market together, the wolf and I. People stopped to stare. A woman grabbed her child and pulled him close. A merchant slammed his shop shutters closed. An old man spat on the ground and made a warning sign with his fingers. "Monster," someone hissed. "Devil," another agreed. I ignored them all. I focused only on putting one foot in front of the other, on leading this creature towards something better, towards safety. The streets of Greystone were steep and narrow, built long ago, when the city was just a small fishing village clinging to the cliff face. Over centuries, it had grown upward as much as outward, buildings stacked upon buildings, creating a maze of staircases and alleys and covered walkways. My room was in one of the oldest parts of the city, where the buildings leaned against each other like drunken sailors, and the stairs were worn smooth by countless feet. Night was falling by the time we reached my building. The lamplighters were making their rounds, touching flame to the oil lamps that hung at every corner. In their flickering light, I could see my breath misting in the cold air. Winter was coming. Soon these streets would be slick with ice, and the wind from the mountains would cut through even the thickest cloak. But tonight I had other concerns. The entrance to my building was a narrow doorway between a baker's shop and a cobbler's stall, both closed for the evening. Inside, a steep staircase wound upward into darkness. 5 flights, 63 steps. I'd counted them 1,000 times. I lit the small oil lamp I kept by the door, its flame guttering in the draft. The wolf stood behind me waiting. The chain around his neck gleamed dully in the lamplight. "I have to let you out of this," I said quietly, my heart hammering so loudly I was certain he could hear it. "The staircase is too narrow otherwise. But if you run, if you kill me, then everything was for nothing." He made no sound. His eyes revealed nothing of his thoughts. My hands trembled so badly that I dropped the second key twice before I managed to fit it into the lock on his chain. The metal was cold against my fingers, and I could feel old blood crusted on its surface. How long had he worn this? With months. The lock clicked open. The chain fell away with a heavy thud that echoed in the stairwell. For a heartbeat, we both froze. The wolf stood there unchained for the first time since I'd seen him. Free to run, free to attack, free to do anything. He shook himself, and I saw the relief run through his body like water. His neck, where the chain had rubbed for so long, was raw and bleeding. But his head came up proud, regal, and I saw for the first time what he must have looked like before this nightmare began. Magnificent. "Up," I whispered, pointing to the stairs. He looked at the narrow staircase, then back at me. Then with careful deliberation, he began to climb. The staircase was barely wide enough for him. He had to move sideways, his shoulders brushing both walls. I went ahead with the lamp lighting the way, my heart in my throat with every step. At any moment he could change his mind. At any moment this fragile trust could shatter. But he followed, step by step, flight by flight, until we finally reached the 5th floor and the small wooden door that led to my room. My chamber was tiny. A narrow bed against one wall, its mattress thin and lumpy. A rickety table beneath the single window where I did my sewing. A fireplace that produced more smoke than warmth, its chimney cracked and leaking. A trunk at the foot of the bed that held everything I owned. The window itself was small and drafty, covered with oiled parchment instead of glass. It was barely big enough for me, and now I was sharing it with a creature half the size of a horse. "Welcome," I murmured, wishing desperately that I had something better to offer. "To my home." He entered slowly, his eyes sweeping across the room, checking every corner, every shadow, every possible threat. Then with a heavy sigh that seemed to come from the depths of his soul, he sank to the floor. The sound of his body hitting the wooden planks was like thunder in that small space. I closed the door behind us and leaned against it, my whole body trembling. Adrenaline, exhaustion, pure undiluted fear. What had I done? I had spent my entire savings on a wolf that could kill me with one bite. I had brought him into my home, into the only place where I felt safe. And yet looking at him now, seeing the way his sides heaved with each breath, seeing the pain in that golden gaze, I knew I would make the same choice again. Madness or not, I couldn't have walked away. The wolf watched me waiting. As I looked into those extraordinary eyes, I noticed something I hadn't seen before in the chaos of the market. There, just visible beneath the matted black fur of his shoulder, was a mark, not a brand or a scar from his captors. This was something else, something that caught the lamplight with the strange silver shimmer, a rune. I took a step closer, my curiosity overcoming my caution. The symbol was intricate, beautiful in its complexity, ancient. It reminded me of something I'd seen once years ago on an old tapestry that had come through Madame Brennan's shop for repair. A tapestry that had belonged to some noble house from the Northern Territories. A tapestry that had shown a crown. And wolves. My breath caught in my throat as understanding began to dawn, terrible and impossible. But that was a thought for tomorrow. Tonight there were more immediate concerns. The muzzle. That cruel iron contraption that cut into his skin with every breath. I have to remove it, I said quietly, my voice steadier than I felt. You can't breathe properly like that. You can't eat or drink. A low rumble emerged from his chest. This time the sound was louder, more threatening, and I saw his whole body tense. I know, so. I raised my hands, slowly showing they were empty. I know you hate it when people touch you. I know you've been hurt by hands like mine. But please, please let me help you. I approached him slowly, inch by careful inch. My heart raced with every step. He could snap at any moment. Muzzle or not, those claws were more than enough to tear me apart. But he didn't move. When I knelt before him, I could hear his breathing. Fast, shallow, painful. The metal of the muzzle had carved deep grooves into his snout. Pus and dried blood were crusted around the edges where the iron had cut into flesh. The sight of it made my eyes burn with unshed tears. I'm so sorry, I whispered, fighting to keep my voice from breaking. I'm so sorry this happened to you. I reached for the buckle at the back of his head. My fingers brushed against his fur. It was rough and matted with blood and filth, but beneath all that I could feel warmth. Life. A heartbeat that matched my own racing pulse. He froze. Every muscle in his massive body went rigid as stone. I felt him trembling beneath my touch, and I didn't know if it was from pain or barely suppressed rage. I won't hurt you, I repeated softly again and again like a prayer. I won't hurt you. I won't. The buckle was old and rusted, corroded by blood and time. I had to pull at it, scratch at the metal with my fingernails, fight against leather that had become stiff and unyielding. My fingers ached, my nails broke. The wolf trembled beneath my hands, and I could feel the effort it took for him to remain still, to not lash out at the pain I was inadvertently causing. Almost there, I breathed. Just a little more. Then suddenly the buckle gave way. The muzzle fell to the floor with a metallic clatter that seemed impossibly loud in the small room. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. The wolf just sat there, his snout finally free, his teeth bared, teeth that could crush bone. Spots on his snout where the iron had cut, spots on his snout where the iron had cut deepest. Then he made a sound, not a growl, something else, a whimper, quiet and brief but unmistakable. Relief, gratitude. The tears came before I could stop them. They spilled down my cheeks, hot and unexpected. I had to look away, had to wipe my face with my sleeve before he could see. Water, I managed to croak. You need water. I stood on shaking legs and fetched the only jug I owned from its place by the window. The water inside was old, tasting faintly of metal from the pipes that fed the building, but it was all I had. I poured it into my washing basin, a chipped ceramic bowl that had belonged to my grandmother. I set it before him. He hesitated, his eyes fixed on me with an intensity that made me feel transparent, as if he could see every thought, every fear, every desperate hope in my heart. Then he lowered his head and drank, and drank, and drank. The basin was empty in seconds. I refilled, he did. He drained it again. I refilled it twice more before he finally stopped raising his head to look at me with something new in his expression. Not hatred, not quite trust, but perhaps the beginning of understanding. We stared at each other across that small room, the seamstress and the wolf. Two creatures who had no business being together, but who were bound now by choice and circumstance, and 300 gold coins that represented everything I'd ever worked for. Outside, I could hear the city settling into night, the calls of the night watch making their rounds, the distant sound of the harbor bells marking the hour. Somewhere people were sitting down to warm dinners. Somewhere families were gathering by their fires. But here in this cold room at the top of 5 flights of stairs, there was only the two of us and the impossible choice I'd made in a future I couldn't begin to imagine. The wolf lay down beside my bed. Not on it, but close enough that I could reach out and touch him if I dared. His breathing began to slow to even out, though I could still see pain in the way he held himself, in the way he favored his injured leg. Tomorrow, I thought. Tomorrow I would examine his wounds properly. Tomorrow I would figure out what to do about food, about money, about all the practical concerns that my impulsive choice had created. But tonight I was too exhausted to think beyond this moment. I collapsed onto my narrow bed, not bothering to remove my muddy dress or my boots. Every bone in my body ached. My mind felt like it was made of wool, thick and slow. Around me the room was cold and the wind whistled through the cracks in the walls. But I wasn't alone. For the first time in 10 years since my grandmother had died and left me truly orphaned, in this world I wasn't alone. As I drifted towards sleep, I felt the wolf shift beside my bed, heard the soft sound of his breathing. And despite everything, despite the madness of what I'd done and the uncertainty of what would come, I felt something I hadn't felt in longer than I could remember. Hope. Just before sleep claimed me, I opened my eyes one last time. In the dim light filtering through my window, I could see him, his massive body curled protectively beside my bed, those luminous eyes fixed on the door, watchful, alert, not sleeping, guarding me. And on his shoulder, just visible in the moonlight, that silver rune gleamed with a light that had nothing to do with the moon or the stars or any natural thing. Magic. I had bought a wolf at the Market of the Damned and brought him home to my tiny room. But as sleep finally pulled me under, one thought followed me into dreams. What if I had bought something more than a wolf? What if I had bought a king? I woke to amber eyes watching me in the gray dawn light. For a moment, confusion clouded my thoughts. Then memory crashed back like a wave. The market, the cage, the wolf. 300 gold coins that no longer existed except as a choice I could never take back. I sat up slowly, every muscle in my body protesting. My dress was still damp with mud from kneeling in the market, and my hair had come loose from its braid during the night. The room was freezing. My breath misted in the air, but the wolf was still there. He hadn't killed me in the night, hadn't run away. He lay exactly where he'd been when I fell asleep, his massive body curled beside my bed, his head resting on his paws. That piercing gaze tracked my every movement. "Good morning," I whispered. A low rumble emerged from his chest. Acknowledgement, perhaps. Or warning. I couldn't tell. I swung my legs out of bed carefully, giving him space to move if he wanted. My boots hit the cold wooden floor with a soft thud. The wolf's ears pricked forward, but he didn't rise. The fireplace was nothing but cold ashes. I had no wood left to burn. I'd used the last of it 3 days ago and hadn't had money to buy more. Now I had no money at all. Reality settled over me like a shroud. What had I done? I couldn't go back to Madame Brennan's shop. Even if she would take me back after I'd been seen at the Market of the Damned, even if she'd believe I hadn't stolen the gold I'd spent, she would never allow me to keep the wolf. And I couldn't return to this room every night knowing he was locked somewhere suffering. I looked at him, really looked at him in the morning light. The wounds covering his body were even worse than I'd thought. The whip marks across his flanks were infected, the flesh around them swollen and hot. The brand marks on his shoulder, just below that strange silver rune, were deep enough that I could see bone beneath the charred flesh. His left hind leg, the one he'd been favoring, had a gash running from hip to knee that needed stitching. How was he even alive? My grandmother's voice echoed in my memory. When I was 6 years old before she died, she taught me about healing. Not magic, she'd always insisted, just knowledge, herbs and roots, and old wisdom passed down through generations of women who couldn't afford physicians. I had my sewing skills. I had what remained of that knowledge. It would have to be enough. "I need to tend your wounds," I said to the wolf. "It will hurt, but if I don't clean them, they'll poison your blood. Do you understand, Jason?" He stared at me for a long moment. Then slowly he pushed himself to his feet. The movement was painful to watch. He couldn't put weight on his left hind leg at all, and I saw him wince as he shifted his shoulders. But he stood, and he waited. I gathered what little I had. An old piece of linen torn and washed so many times it was soft as silk. The last of my water. A tiny bottle of spirits I'd been saving for emergencies, bought from Seraphine's shop months ago. The alcohol would clean the wounds, but it would burn like fire. I knelt beside him, moving slowly enough that he could see every motion. I'll start with your flank. The whip marks, they're infected. I dampened the linen with water, first trying to be gentle, as I touched it to the first wound. The wolf's whole body went rigid. That deep rumble returned, vibrating through the floorboards. I understand, I murmured. I know it hurts. I worked as carefully as I could, cleaning away the dried blood and pus. The wounds were deep, cutting through fur and skin down to the muscle beneath. Whoever had done this had wanted him to suffer, had enjoyed making him suffer. Rage flared in my chest, hot and unexpected. I'd never been an angry person. Anger was a luxury the poor couldn't afford. But looking at these wounds, at the systematic cruelty they represented, I felt fury burning in my veins. They'll pay, I whispered. Whoever did this to you, somehow they'll pay. A soft sound escaped the wolf's throat, not quite a whine, but something close. When I looked up, that intense gaze was fixed on my face with a force that made my breath catch. He understood. Somehow, impossibly, he understood every word. I continued cleaning wound by wound. The water in my basin turned pink, then red. When I'd cleaned away the worst of the blood and filth, I opened the bottle of spirits. This will hurt worse, I warned him, but it will keep the wounds from festering. I poured a small amount onto a clean section of linen, then pressed it gently to the first whip mark. The wolf's reaction was immediate. His whole body tensed like a bowstring. A sharp whine of pain escaped his throat before he could stop it. His teeth bared, and for a terrible moment, I thought he might snap at me. But he didn't. He stayed perfectly still, trembling with the effort of restraint, while I continued working. Each time I applied the spirits, his body jerked. Each time that soft whine escaped. But each time he held himself still and let me work. Brave, I murmured, my voice thick with emotion. You're so brave. The brand marks were the worst. They'd been burned deep, the symbols harsh and angular. I recognized them now in the daylight. They were ownership marks, the kind slave traders used on their human merchandise. My hands shook as I cleaned around them. The flesh was so damaged that I wasn't sure it would ever heal properly. He would carry these scars forever. When I reached the gash on his hind leg, I knew it needed more than cleaning. The edges of the wound had pulled apart, and I could see deep into the muscle beneath. This needs stitching, I said quietly. I'll have to use thread and needle. It will hurt more than anything else. He looked at me steadily. Then deliberately he lay down on his side, exposing the wound more fully. Permission. I retrieved my sewing basket from its place by the window. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely thread the needle. I chose the finest silk thread when I had the kind I used for delicate embroidery. It was strong but thin enough not to tear the damaged tissue. Ready, I asked. He didn't respond, just watched me with those knowing eyes. I worked as quickly as I could, pushing the curved needle through skin and muscle, pulling the edges of the wound together with careful stitches. The wolf trembled beneath my hands. His breathing came fast and harsh, but he didn't move, didn't pull away. When I finished, my hands were covered in his blood. 15 stitches, small and neat, holding the wound closed. It wasn't perfect. A real physician could have done better, but it was the best I could offer. Done, I whispered, sitting back on my heels. It's done. The wolf raised his head slowly and looked at the stitched wound. Then he did something I didn't expect. His snout moved forward, slow and careful. He touched his nose to my hand, just a fleeting touch, barely more than a breath of warmth against my skin. But it was there. Trust. My eyes burned with unshed tears. Thank you, I managed, for letting me help. I cleaned my hands as best I could and stood. My knees were stiff from kneeling so long, and my back ached. Outside, I could hear the city waking, the bells of the harbor ringing the morning hour, the calls of vendors setting up their stalls in the market squares. My stomach growled loudly. I couldn't remember the last time I'd eaten. Yesterday morning, perhaps. Before I'd left for work at the tailor's shop, before my world had changed in the space of one impulsive choice, I went to my small cupboard and opened it. Inside was half a loaf of bread, hard and stale. A small piece of cheese wrapped in cloth, spotted with mold that I'd have to cut away. An apple wrinkled and soft. It was all the food I had, and no money to buy more. I looked at the wolf. He was watching me, his head tilted slightly. I divided the food carefully. Most of the bread for him, the apple cut in pieces. The cheese I split evenly after cutting away the moldy parts. It wasn't enough. not for a creature his size, but it was all I could offer. I set his portion on the floor in front of him. He looked at it, then at me. He didn't move to eat. Go on, I said. You need your strength to heal. Still, he didn't touch it. Then deliberately, he pushed the portion of bread back toward me with his nose. My throat tightened. No, that's yours. I'll be fine. He pushed it again, more insistently this time. We stared at each other across that small room, two stubborn creatures, each trying to sacrifice for the other. Despite everything, despite the cold and the hunger and the uncertainty, I felt laughter bubbling up in my chest. We're both fools, aren't we? I said softly. I took one small piece of the bread and ate it. Only then did he lower his head and begin eating his portion. He finished it in 3 bites, barely enough to fill a fraction of his belly. This couldn't continue. I needed to find food, find money, find some way to survive. But first I needed to visit someone who might help. Seraphine Aldrich's shop was tucked between a cobbler and a candle maker on Eastgate Street, close enough to the respectable parts of the city to attract wealthy customers but far enough from the noble quarter to keep prices reasonable. The sign above the door showed a mortar and pestle surrounded by herbs. I'd known Seraphine since I was a child. She'd been my grandmother's closest friend, and after grandmother died, she'd watched over me in her own quiet way. A loaf of bread left at my door when times were hard, a jar of honey when I was sick. Small kindnesses that had kept me alive. The bells above the door chimed as I entered. The shop smelled of dried herbs and flowers of earth and growing things. Bundles of lavender and rosemary hung from the ceiling beams. Jars lined the walls filled with powders and tinctures and remedies I couldn't name. Seraphine emerged from the back room, wiping her hands on her apron. She was 58 with gray hair pulled back in a severe bun and sharp eyes that missed nothing. When she saw me, those eyes widened. Elspeth Thorne, she said slowly. I heard a rumor yesterday evening that couldn't possibly be true. I said nothing. They said, she continued, her voice carefully neutral, that a foolish girl spent 300 gold coins at the Market of the Damned, that she bought a wolf, a monster they called it. They said she'd be dead by morning. I'm not dead, I said quietly, and I'm 25 years old, Seraphine, not a foolish girl. Seraphine's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. Show me your hands. I held them out. She took them in her own, turning them over, examining the blood under my fingernails, the scratches from the wolf's fur, the needle pricks from stitching his wound. You stitched it, she said. It wasn't a question. I had to. The wound was too deep. And it didn't kill you. No, she released my hands and walked to one of the shelves, selecting jars and packets with practiced efficiency. Silverleaf for infection, comfrey root for the wounds, valerian for pain. She wrapped each in brown paper and tied them with twine. Boil the comfrey root and make a poultice. Apply it twice daily. The silver leaf you can crush and mix with animal fat if you have any. It will help the wounds close faster. She set the packets on the counter between us. I have no money, I said quietly. Did I ask for money? Seraphine, your grandmother saved my daughter's life when she had the fever. Seraphine interrupted. I could never repay that debt. Let me do this much. She added another package to the pile. Bread, fresh this morning, and dried meat. Not much, but enough for a few days. My eyes burned. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. She leaned forward, her voice dropping. There are men asking about the wolf. Wealthy men. They came to my shop this morning showing a drawing. A black wolf with eyes like molten gold. They're offering a reward for information. My blood ran cold. What did you tell them? That I'd seen nothing, but others won't be so careful with their tongues, Elspeth. If you're going to keep this creature, you can't stay in the city. It's not safe. Where would I go? She hesitated, then reached under the counter and pulled out a small key. My husband died 3 years ago. He had a hunting cabin in Thornwood Forest 2 days' walk east of here. It's been empty since he passed. The roof is sound and there's a well nearby. It's isolated. No one goes there anymore. She pressed the key into my hand. Mow your wolf and go tonight. Don't wait for morning. I can't take your cabin. You can and you will. Your grandmother would never forgive me if I let you come to harm. Her fingers tightened on mine. But Elspeth, you need to understand something. Those men who are looking for the wolf, they're not bounty hunters or animal catchers. They wore fine clothes, noble clothes. Whatever that creature is, someone powerful wants it back. I thought of the silver rune on the wolf's shoulder, the intelligence in his eyes, the way he seemed to understand every word I spoke. I know, I whispered. Seraphine studied my face for a long moment. Then she nodded. Be careful, child, and if you need help, you know where to find me. I returned to my room to find the wolf standing by the window looking out over the city. He turned when I entered, and I saw wariness in his posture. We're leaving, I said, setting down the packages Seraphine had given me. Tonight after dark. It's not safe here anymore. He tilted his head, listening. I spent the afternoon gathering what little I owned. My spare dress, my grandmother's herb book, my sewing basket. Everything fit into a small canvas bag. As the sun set, I noticed the wolf had moved to the corner where the moonlight would fall through the window. He sat there perfectly still, his eyes fixed on the darkening sky. What are you waiting for? I asked. He didn't answer, of course. But as the first rays of moonlight touched his fur, I saw it. The silver rune on his shoulder began to glow. Not brightly, just a soft shimmer like starlight on water. The symbol seemed to pulse with its own inner light, independent of any natural source. I knelt beside him slowly, hardly daring to breathe. Up close, I could see other runes, too, faint, barely visible beneath the black fur, but there, running down his spine, across his ribs, circling his legs like ancient writing. You're not just a wolf, I whispered. Are you? He turned his head to look at me. In the moonlight, those eyes seemed to burn with inner fire. I thought of the tapestry I'd once repaired, the crown of wolves, the northern territories where the old families still claimed descent from ancient bloodlines, the stories my grandmother used to tell about the wolf kings who ruled before the current dynasty. Stories everyone said were just legends. But what if they weren't? The merchants at the market, I said, slowly piecing it together. They didn't know what you were. They just saw a dangerous animal. But someone else knew. Someone who wanted you caged and suffering. Someone who stood to gain from your disappearance. The wolf watched me steadily. That's why the men are looking for you, not to kill you, to take you back, to keep you prisoner. A sound emerged from deep in his chest. Not quite a growl, something sadder. Agreement. I sat back on my heels, my mind racing. I'd thought I was saving a wolf. I'd thought my impulsive choice was simple foolishness, a kind heart making a stupid decision. To go, I said, standing. Now before they to go, I said, standing. Now before they come. I shouldered my bag and opened the door. The wolf rose to his feet, moving more easily now that the wounds had been cleaned. He limped to my side and waited. Together we descended the 5 flights of stairs for the last time. Out into the streets of Greystone, away from the only home I'd ever known. The city was settling into night. Lamplights flickered in windows. Families gathered around their tables. Somewhere a mother was singing her child to sleep. But we were leaving all of that behind, walking away from safety and familiarity into darkness and uncertainty. The wolf stayed close to my side as we moved through the shadowed streets, heading east toward the city gates. His shoulder brushed against my leg with each step warm and solid. Real. I'd spent 10 years saving for freedom, for a life of my own choosing, and in one impulsive moment, I'd found it. Not in the way I'd planned, not in a cottage with a garden and peaceful solitude, but in this, in walking through the night with a wolf who might be a king, in choosing compassion over safety, in burning my old life to ash so something new could grow. My hand found its way to his head, my fingers tangling in his fur as we walked. He leaned into the touch just slightly, and I felt his warmth seeping into my skin. We'll figure this out, I told him quietly. Whatever you are, whatever they did to you, we'll find a way. The city gates loomed ahead, tall and forbidding. The guards were changing shifts, distracted. We slipped through into the darkness beyond, and with each step that took us farther from Greystone, I felt the weight of my choice settling around me like a cloak. I'd saved a wolf at the Market of the Damned, but perhaps, just perhaps, the wolf would save me too. Behind us, the city lights faded. Ahead, the forest waited, and somewhere in that darkness, in a cabin I'd never seen, our real story would begin. The forest swallowed us whole. One moment we were walking along the eastern road, Greystone's lights still visible behind us like dying stars. The next we'd turned onto a narrow path that wound between ancient trees, and the city vanished as if it had never existed. Thornwood Forest was old. Older than Greystone, older than the current dynasty, perhaps older than human memory itself. The trees here were massive, their trunks so wide that 3 men couldn't have linked hands around them. Their branches formed a canopy so thick that even at midday, the forest floor lived in perpetual twilight. Now in the deepest part of night, it was nearly pitch black. I'd brought a small lantern from my room, but its light seemed pathetic against the darkness. The flame flickered and danced, casting wild shadows that made every tree look like a lurking giant. Every rustle of leaves sounded like footsteps. Every crack of a branch was a pursuer drawing close. But the wolf seemed unbothered. He walked slightly ahead of me, his black fur making him almost invisible in the darkness. But I could hear him, the soft pad of his paws on the forest floor, the rhythm of his breathing. The occasional pause as he stopped to scent the air, making sure we were alone, making sure we were safe. How much farther, I asked, more to hear my own voice than because I expected an answer. Seraphine said 2 days walk, but she didn't say if that was for a person or... I trailed off. The wolf had stopped, his head raised, his ears pricked forward. I froze, my heart suddenly hammering. What is it? He remained still for a long moment. Then slowly he turned and looked back at me. Even in the darkness, I could see the glow of his eyes. He jerked his head to the left toward a path I hadn't noticed. A trail even narrower than the one we'd been following, barely more than a deer track winding between the trees. That way, I asked. He moved toward it without waiting for me to follow, and I hurried to keep up. The new path was rougher, forcing me to watch my footing carefully. Roots snaked across the ground like grasping fingers. Stones lurked beneath fallen leaves, ready to turn an ankle. But the wolf navigated it all with ease, his injured leg barely slowing him down now that the wound had been stitched and cleaned. We walked for what felt like hours. My legs ached. My shoulders burned from the weight of my bag. The hand holding the lantern grew numb with cold and strain. But I didn't complain, couldn't complain. Behind us, men were looking for the wolf. Men with money and power and no qualms about hurting anyone who stood in their way. If we stopped now, if we turned back, everything I'd sacrificed would be for nothing. So I kept walking. The wolf would occasionally pause and wait for me to catch up, his patience evident in the way he sat perfectly still while I navigated a particularly difficult section of path. Once, when I stumbled over a hidden root and nearly fell, he was there instantly, his solid shoulder bracing me until I regained my balance. Thank you, I gasped, my hand gripping his fur for support. A soft huff escaped him, and I could have sworn there was amusement in it. Dawn was breaking when we finally stopped to rest. The forest had begun to thin slightly, the trees spreading apart enough to let in shafts of pale morning light. The wolf led me to a small clearing where a stream burbled over smooth stones. The water was clear and cold, running down from the mountains to the north. I collapsed beside the stream, too exhausted to care about dignity. My feet were blistering inside my boots. My back felt like it might never straighten again. Every muscle screamed for rest. The wolf drank from the stream, then settled nearby, his gaze scanning the forest around us. Still guarding, still protecting. I fumbled in my bag for the bread and dried meat Seraphine had given us. The bread was already stale, but I was too hungry to care. I tore off a piece and offered it to the wolf. He took it gently from my fingers, his teeth never once touching my skin. Then he ate slowly, methodically, as if savoring each bite, or perhaps simply conserving energy. We sat together in that clearing as the sun rose higher, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Birds began to sing in the trees around us. Somewhere in the distance, a deer crashed through the underbrush. Normal sounds, peaceful sounds. For the first time since I'd walked into the Market of the Damned, I felt some of the tension leave my shoulders. We'll rest here for a few hours, I said quietly. Then we keep moving. Seraphine said the cabin is 2 days' walk. If we push hard, maybe we can make it by tomorrow night. The wolf's eyes were half closed, but I knew he was listening. I knew he heard every word. I pulled my grandmother's journal from my bag. It was a small book, its leather cover cracked with age, its pages yellowed and brittle. I'd read it a dozen times over the years, memorizing her recipes for healing salves and fever remedies. But now I was looking for something else. I flipped through the pages past the familiar entries about silverleaf and comfrey root, past her notes on setting broken bones and treating burns. Near the back of the book, I found what I was searching for. A section I'd always skimmed over before dismissing it as fancy. Stories I'd thought, old legends my grandmother had written down for entertainment. But now reading the words again, they felt different. The wolf kings of the north she'd written in her careful script. Not myth as the scholars claim. I saw one once when I was a girl. He came to our village during the harsh winter of my 12th year when the snows were so deep that people were starving. He brought food, organized hunting parties, kept us alive. He was a man tall and broad-shouldered, with eyes like molten gold. But when the moon rose, he changed, became something other, something ancient and powerful and terrible in its beauty. The nobles fear them, fear their power, their connection to the old magic that ran through this land before the current dynasty claimed it. One by one, the wolf kings have disappeared, hunted, killed, or worse. I have heard whispers of a dark magic, A curse that can trap a wolf king in his animal form, stripping away his humanity, his ability to change at will, leaving him powerless, prisoner in his own skin. The cure, if there is one, requires a sacrifice, not of blood or gold, but of something more precious, a pure heart, an act of selflessness with no expectation of reward. I looked up from the journal to find the wolf watching me. A pure heart, I said softly, an act of selflessness. 300 gold coins. Everything I'd owned, given freely expecting nothing in return except the chance to ease suffering. Was that why the runes had begun to glow? Why he seemed more alert, more present, more himself with each passing hour? But he was still a wolf, still trapped, which meant the curse wasn't fully broken. Or perhaps there was more required. Something I hadn't yet done. I closed the journal and tucked it back into my bag. We should sleep, just for a few hours. I lay down on the soft grass beside the stream, using my bag as a pillow. The ground was cold and hard, but I was too tired to care. My eyes were already closing before I'd fully settled. I felt the wolf move closer, felt the warmth of his body as he curled around me, creating a barrier between me and the forest, protecting me even in sleep. Safe, I thought, as darkness claimed me. For the first time in my life, I felt truly safe. I woke to the sensation of something wet on my face. My eyes flew open to find the wolf standing over me, his nose pressed to my forehead. When he saw I was awake, he stepped back, his tail giving a single wag. The sun had moved across the sky. We'd slept longer than I'd intended, probably 4 or 5 hours, judging by the angle of the light. "We need to go," I said, sitting up. My body protested, every movement muscle stiff and sore from the night's walk. But there was no choice. We had to keep moving. The second day of walking was harder than the first. My feet, already blistered, grew worse with each step. The straps of my bag dug into my shoulders, creating raw spots that burned. Hunger gnawed at my stomach. We'd finished the bread and meat Seraphine had given us, and I had nothing left. But the wolf seemed to sense my struggle. He stayed close sometimes, pressing against my leg to help support me when the path grew steep. When we crossed streams, he would wade in first, testing the depth, finding the safest route. Once, when I had to stop and rest, too exhausted to take another step, he disappeared into the forest. I waited, trying not to panic, trying to trust that he would return. He came back carrying a rabbit in his jaws. He dropped it at my feet, then sat back watching me expectantly. "You hunted," I said, staring at the fresh kill. "For me." He nudged the rabbit closer with his nose. I'd never prepared game before, never had to. But I had my small knife, and necessity was a harsh teacher. I did my best skinning the animal with shaking hands, trying not to think too hard about what I was doing. We couldn't risk a fire, not when we didn't know who might be following. So we ate the meat raw, and though it turned my stomach, at first hunger made it acceptable. The wolf took only a small portion for himself, leaving most for me. Always sacrificing, always giving. "We're a pair of fools," I told him as we walked on, and both trying to save each other. His ear flicked back, listening. "I don't even know your name," I continued. "I've been calling you by nothing except wolf in my head. That doesn't seem right. You deserve better." I thought about it as we walked, about the silver runes that glowed in moonlight, about the stories of wolf kings and old magic. "Nightshade," I said finally. "That's what I'll call you. For your black fur and for the way you appeared in the darkest moment of my life." He stopped walking and turned to look at me. For a long moment, we stood there on the forest path, woman and wolf, separated by everything that should have kept us apart, but bound by something neither of us fully understood. Then he dipped his head, just slightly. Acceptance. Nightshade. We reached the cabin as the sun was setting on the second day. It appeared almost without warning, nestled in a small clearing, surrounded by tall pines. The structure was simple, built from rough-hewn logs chinked with clay and moss. A stone chimney rose from one end, and a small porch sheltered the front door. It was perfect. I used Seraphine's key to unlock the door, my hands trembling with exhaustion and relief. The interior was dim, lit only by the fading daylight through 2 small windows. One large room served as everything: kitchen, bedroom, living space. A fireplace dominated one wall. A narrow bed stood in the corner. A rough wooden table and 2 chairs occupied the center. Shelves lined the walls, holding dust-covered pots and tools. It was dusty and cold and smelled of disuse. It was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. "Home," I whispered, "at least for now." Nightshade entered cautiously, his nose working to catalog every scent. He limped around the room, investigating corners, checking the windows. When he was satisfied we were alone and safe, he settled in front of the fireplace with a heavy sigh. I wanted to collapse beside him to sleep for a week straight. But there was work to be done first. I found wood stacked neatly beside the fireplace, old but still dry. Within an hour, I had a fire burning, its warmth beginning to chase away the chill. I swept the floor and shook out the blankets on the bed, sending up clouds of dust that made me sneeze. Outside, I found the well Seraphine had mentioned. The water was clean and cold, tasting of minerals and stone. I drew up bucket after bucket, heating some over the fire for washing. As darkness fell, I finally had a moment to rest. I sat on the floor in front of the fire, my back against the wall, and looked at what we'd accomplished. The cabin was clean, the fire burned bright. We had shelter and safety. For the first time in 2 days, we could breathe. Nightshade lay nearby, his head resting on his paws. The firelight played across his black fur, and I could see the wounds I'd stitched. They were healing well, the edges drawing together cleanly. The infection seemed to be fading, though he would carry the scars forever. I need to check your leg, I said, moving closer. Make sure the stitches are holding. He rolled onto his side without protest, exposing the wound. I examined it carefully in the firelight. The stitches were tight and clean. No sign of infection or tearing. My rough field medicine had worked. Good, I murmured, running my hand along his flank. You're healing. My fingers found other scars beneath his fur, old ones long healed. Nightshade had been fighting long before I found him. Had been suffering for far longer than just the weeks in that cage. Who did this to you? I asked softly. Who hurt you so badly? A sound emerged from deep in his chest, not quite a growl, something sadder. My hand drifted up to his shoulder, to the silver rune that had caught my attention that first night. In the firelight, I could see it clearly now. The symbol was intricate, beautiful in its complexity, ancient script forming a pattern that seemed to shift and change as I looked at it. A crown, I realized with a start. The rune formed a crown when viewed from the right angle. You were someone important, I said, before they did this to you, someone with power and position. Those luminous eyes met mine, and in their depths I saw confirmation. A king, I breathed. You were a king. He held my gaze for a long moment. Then deliberately he placed his head on my lap. The weight of it was solid and warm. Real. Trust. I stroked his fur slowly, my fingers gentle. What happened to you, Nightshade? How did a king end up in a cage at the Market of the Damned? He couldn't answer, of course. But as I sat there in the firelight, my hand moving in steady rhythm across his fur, I felt him relax. Felt some of the terrible tension that had held his body rigid since the moment I'd first seen him begin to ease. Outside, the wind picked up, whistling through the pines. An owl called in the distance. The forest settled into its nighttime rhythms, full of small sounds and movements. But inside the cabin, there was warmth and safety and something else. Something I was almost afraid to name. Connection. I'll find a way, I promised him quietly. I don't know how yet, but I'll find a way to break the curse completely, to give you back what was taken. His eyes drifted closed, but I felt his awareness, felt him listening. My grandmother wrote about wolf kings, about old magic and ancient power. If there's a cure, if there's a way to restore you, I'll find it. I swear it. I don't know how long we sat like that. Long enough for the fire to burn down to embers. Long enough for the moon to rise and cast silver light through the windows. Finally, exhaustion won. I moved to the narrow bed and Nightshade followed. He curled up on the floor beside it, close enough that I could reach down and touch him. But as I lay there staring at the ceiling beams, my mind wouldn't quiet. Who had done this to him? Who had the power and knowledge to curse a wolf king? And more importantly, who had the motivation, the men searching for him, the reward being offered? Someone wanted Nightshade back. Not to free him, but to keep him prisoner. Which meant they still had something to gain from his suffering. Land, perhaps, or power. Without a king, a territory would be vulnerable, could be claimed, could be stolen. My grandmother's journal had mentioned it. The wolf kings had been disappearing one by one, not killed, but cursed, removed from power while still technically alive. A coup, then, a slow, methodical takeover of the northern territories by someone patient enough to work in shadows, someone who wouldn't stop until every wolf king was gone. I reached down and rested my hand on Nightshade's head. He made a soft sound, pressing up into my touch. They won't take you back, I whispered fiercely. I won't let them. I don't care how powerful they are or how much gold they offer. You're not going back to that cage. Outside, something moved in the forest. A snap of branches, the rustle of leaves. Nightshade's head came up instantly, his ears pricked forward. A low growl rumbled in his chest. I sat up, my heart pounding. What is it? He moved to the window, silent as smoke. I followed, pressing close to the wall, peering out into the darkness. At first I saw nothing, just trees and shadows and moonlight. Then I saw them, figures, moving through the forest. 4, maybe 5 of them, carrying lanterns that bobbed like fireflies in the darkness, searching. They found us. I breathed, terror closing around my throat like a fist. How did they find us so fast? Nightshade's growl deepened. His lips pulled back from his teeth, and in the moonlight I saw the wild thing he'd been when they first caged him. The killer. The creature capable of taking down 3 hunters. But there were too many, and I could see even from this distance that they carried weapons. Crossbows, nets, the tools of professional hunters. We can't fight them, I said urgently. There are too many and you're still healing. His eyes never left the window. Every muscle in his body was coiled tight, ready to spring. I thought frantically. The cabin had only one door, one obvious exit, but Seraphine's husband had been a hunter, and hunters always had escape routes. I grabbed my bag and moved to the back wall, running my hands along the logs. There had to be something. A hidden door, a weak panel. My fingers found a gap between 2 logs. I pulled, and a section of the wall swung inward, revealing a narrow passage that led outside. Here, I hissed. Nightshade here. He hesitated, torn between the threat at the front and my voice at the back. The lanterns were getting closer. I could hear voices now, rough and professional. The wolf's in there. I can smell it. Circle around, don't let it escape. Remember, Lord Thaddeus wants it alive. The girl too, if possible. Lord Thaddeus. So that was the name of our hunter. Nightshade, I said, my voice steady despite my fear. Trust me, please. He turned from the window and limped to my side. Together we slipped through the hidden passage and out into the night. Behind us I heard the cabin door crash open. Heard shouts of anger as they discovered we'd escaped. But we were already running Nightshade, and I disappearing into the deep forest where the moonlight couldn't reach. And as we ran, as the sounds of pursuit faded behind us, I felt something shift inside my chest. I'd saved Nightshade at the market because it was right, because I couldn't walk away from suffering. But now, running through the darkness with a wolf who might be a king, I realized something. I wasn't just saving him anymore. I was fighting alongside him. And I wouldn't stop fighting until he was truly free. We ran until my lungs burned and my legs threatened to give out beneath me. Nightshade stayed close, guiding me through the darkness with an instinct I couldn't match. Several times I stumbled over roots or rocks I couldn't see, and each time his solid body was there to catch me, to keep me moving forward. Behind us, the sounds of pursuit grew fainter. The hunters' lanterns became distant fireflies, then vanished altogether as the forest swallowed their light. But Nightshade didn't slow. He seemed to know where he was going, following some invisible path only he could sense. And I trusted him. Had no choice but to trust him. We ran for hours. Dawn was breaking when we finally stopped at the edge of a ravine. Below us, a river churned over jagged rocks, its roar filling the air. Nightshade paused at the edge, looking down, then back at me. "We can't cross that," I panted, my chest heaving. "It's too dangerous." But he was already moving along the ravine's edge, searching. 100 yards downstream, he found what he was looking for, a fallen tree that spanned the gap like a natural bridge. The trunk was wide enough to walk across, but it was slick with moss and spray from the river below. One wrong step would send me plunging into the churning water. Nightshade crossed first, his forelegs giving him balance I didn't possess. On the other side, he turned and watched me waiting. I took a deep breath and stepped onto the log. The world narrowed to that single piece of wood beneath my feet. The roar of the river below, the trembling in my legs. Each step was an act of faith, each breath a prayer. Halfway across, my foot slipped. I gasped, arms windmilling, certain I was about to fall. But Nightshade was there, somehow had raced back across the log, faster than should have been possible. His teeth closed gently on my sleeve, steadying me until I regained my balance. We crossed the rest of the way together, and when my feet touched solid ground on the far side, I collapsed to my knees, shaking. Nightshade licked my face once, then moved ahead, still alert, still guarding. "Where are we going?" I asked, climbing to my feet. "You know something, don't you? You're leading us somewhere specific." He glanced back at me, those eyes knowing, then continued forward. The forest on this side of the ravine was different, older. The trees were massive, their trunks gnarled and twisted with age. Moss hung from their branches like ancient beards. The air itself felt heavy with something I couldn't name. Magic, I realized. This forest breathed with old magic. We walked for another hour as the sun climbed higher. My exhaustion had passed beyond pain into a numb acceptance. One foot in front of the other. That was all I could manage. Then Nightshade stopped so suddenly I nearly walked into him. Ahead through the trees I saw stone. Not natural stone. Worked stone. Ancient blocks fitted together with such precision that no mortar was needed. They rose from the forest floor like broken teeth, the remains of something that had once been grand. A temple. My grandmother's journal had mentioned this. The dark magic required a place of power, an ancient site where the barriers between worlds grew thin. This was where they'd cursed him. Nightshade moved forward slowly, his head low, his body tense. I could feel his fear, his reluctance to approach this place where his humanity had been torn away. But he kept moving, because there was no other choice. The temple had once been magnificent. Even in ruins I could see the craftsmanship. The walls were covered in carving symbols and figures that seemed to writhe in the corner of my vision. 4 pillars still stood marking the corners of what had been the main chamber. In the center, a stone altar rose from the ground, its surface stained dark with something that might have been blood, or might have been something worse. Nightshade circled the altar, once sniffing a low rumble in his throat. Then he sat and looked at me. "This is it, isn't it?" I said quietly. "This is where they did it to you." His ears flattened against his skull. I approached the altar carefully. Up close I could see that the stains weren't blood. They were symbols carved into the stone and filled with some dark substance that had hardened over time. A ritual then, a ceremony conducted with precise intent. My fingers traced the symbols and I felt a shock run through me. Cold, deep, wrong. This magic was corrupt, twisted. It took something beautiful and pure and perverted it into chains. "How do we break it?" I whispered. "Grandmother wrote about selfless sacrifice, but I've already given everything I have." "What more?" A sound behind us made me whirl around. They'd found us. Lord Thaddeus Blackthorn stood at the edge of the temple ruins, flanked by 8 men. They wore the livery of professional hunters and each carried weapons. Crossbows, nets edged with silver, iron chains. Thaddeus himself was exactly as Seraphine had described. 52 years old, tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in fine black velvet, embroidered with silver. His face was handsome in a cold way, all sharp angles and calculating eyes. A man used to power, used to getting what he wanted. "Elspeth Thorne," he said, his voice smooth as silk, "you've led us on quite a chase." I moved to stand in front of Nightshade. "How did you find us?" "I have resources you can't imagine, girl. Trackers who can follow a trail days old. Scouts who know every path through Thornwood." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Did you really think you could hide from me?" "What do you want?" "What do I want?" He laughed. "The same thing I've wanted for 3 years, the Blackwood Territory. 300 square miles of forest and mountain with silver mines worth 500,000 gold coins. All of it belonging to a single family, the Greythorn Blackwoods." His eyes fixed on Nightshade. "All of it belonging to him when he wore a man's face. But without a king to claim it, the land falls under crown jurisdiction. And the crown, influenced by the right voices on the city council, can grant those lands to new stewards." "To you," I said, "to me." Thaddeus took a step closer. "It took careful planning, years of preparation, finding the right dark mage, learning the ritual, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. You did this to him." Rage made my voice shake. "You turned a king into an animal." I removed an obstacle. Nothing more. Thaddeus gestured to his men. "Take the wolf. Kill the girl if she resists." The hunters moved forward. Nightshade surged to his feet, placing himself between me and the approaching men. His lips pulled back from his teeth, and the growl that emerged from his chest was pure murder. "Wait," I said desperately. "Please, I'll give you whatever you want. Just let him go." Thaddeus raised a hand, stopping his men. "You have nothing I want, girl, except perhaps information. How did you break the bindings? The curse should have kept him fully animal, mindless, but I see intelligence in those eyes. Awareness." I thought of my grandmother's words, a pure heart, an act of selflessness. 300 gold coins, everything I'd owned, given freely expecting nothing. But the curse wasn't fully broken. Nightshade was still trapped in animal form, which meant there was more required, something I hadn't yet given. "I asked you a question," Thaddeus said, his voice hardening. "Answer, or I'll have my men put a crossbow bolt through each of your knees." "Go to hell," I spat. His hand came up to strike me. Everything happened at once. Nightshade lunged faster than I'd ever seen him move. His jaws snapped closed on Thaddeus's outstretched arm. The man screamed. The hunters released their crossbows. Silver-tipped bolts flew through the air. I threw myself at Nightshade, knocking him aside. Pain exploded in my shoulder as a bolt meant for him struck me instead. I fell. The world went sideways. I saw the stone altar rushing up to meet me, felt the impact as my head struck its edge. Blood, warm and wet, flowing down my face, pooling on the altar's surface. Through dimming vision, I saw the blood touch those carved symbols. Saw them begin to glow. "No!" Thaddeus shouted. "Stop her, the blood!" Too late. The symbols blazed with golden light. The air itself seemed to tear apart. Power erupted from the altar, rolling outward in waves that knocked the hunters off their feet. And Nightshade threw back his head and howled. But it wasn't an animal sound, it was something else. Ancient, powerful, filled with 3 years of rage and pain and loss. The light intensified until I had to close my eyes against it. I felt heat, pressure, the sensation of reality bending around us, then silence. I opened my eyes. Nightshade was gone. In his place stood a man. He was magnificent. 34 years old, 6.5 feet tall, with broad shoulders and a warrior's build. His hair was black as midnight, falling wild to his shoulders. His face was angular and strong, with high cheekbones and a proud jaw. Scars covered his body, mapping every torment he'd endured. The silver runes were still visible, glowing faintly on his skin like living tattoos. But it was his eyes that held me. The same impossible eyes I'd come to know so well, burning with golden fire. "Lucien," I whispered, somehow knowing his name. "Lucien Graythorn Blackwood." He looked down at his hands, human hands, flexed his fingers, touched his face. Then his gaze found mine, and I saw tears streaming down his cheeks. "You freed me," he said, his voice raw with emotion. "You gave your blood, your life." The curse I managed, though my vision was growing dark around the edges. It required sacrifice. Not gold. Life. No. He was beside me in an instant, his hands pressing against my shoulder where the bolt had struck. "No, you don't get to die for me. Not after everything." "Worth it," I whispered. "You're free." "Touching," Thaddeus snarled. He'd regained his feet, his arm bleeding where Lucien had bitten him. "But pointless. Men take them both." Lucien's head came up, and the look in his eyes made the hunters falter. "You dare," he said, his voice resonating with power I could feel in my bones. "You dare threaten her. The woman who saved me when all of you abandoned me to suffering." The runes on his body flared brighter. The ground beneath our feet began to tremble. "I am Lucien Graythorn Blackwood, Alpha King of the Northern Territories. And you, Thaddeus Blackthorn, have made a grave mistake." He stood, lifting me in his arms as if I weighed nothing. But before he could speak again, a sound erupted from the forest. Not the hunters. Something else. Howls. Dozens of them rising in chorus. From between the trees they came. Wolves. No, men who were also wolves. Some in human form, some mid-transformation, some fully animal. 60 warriors, their eyes blazing with the same golden fire as Lucien's. At their head strode a man in his 40s, a scar running across his face from temple to jaw. He dropped to one knee before Lucien. "My king," and he said, his voice rough with emotion. "We felt it. The curse breaking. We came as fast as we could." "Theron," Lucien breathed, "you waited all this time. We never stopped believing you would return." Theron's eyes swept over me, taking in the blood, the bolt still embedded in my shoulder. "This is her, the one who freed you." "She's dying," Lucien said, his voice breaking. "I need—" "Then we run." Theron gestured to 2 wolves. "Carry the king and his savior. The rest of you secure the temple. If Thaddeus's men return, show no mercy." The warriors moved with military precision. 2 shifted into massive wolves lying flat so Lucien could climb on while cradling me. And then we were flying through the forest faster than any horse, the pack surrounding us in protective formation. Lucien's arms tightened around me. "Hold on," he whispered. "Just hold on. I'll get you help." The cabin, I managed, my voice fading. "Seraphine's," but darkness was already claiming me. Safe, I thought, as consciousness slipped away. He has his people back. He's truly free, and that was enough. I woke to firelight and the smell of herbs. For a moment, I didn't know where I was. Then memory returned in fragments. The temple. The blood. Lucien standing before me in human form for the first time. The crossbow bolt. I tried to sit up, and pain lanced through my shoulder. A hand pressed gently against my uninjured side, easing me back down. "Don't move," a familiar voice said. "The wound is deep. You need to rest." Seraphine. I turned my head and saw her sitting beside the bed in the cabin. Her face was lined with worry, but she smiled when she saw I was awake. How long? I asked, my voice rough. 3 days. You've been fevered, but the worst has passed. She gestured to a figure standing by the window. Thanks to him. Lucian turned from the window and my breath caught. He was dressed now in simple clothes that must have come from the cabin's stores. But even in rough homespun, he looked regal. Powerful. Every inch a king. He crossed to the bed and knelt beside it, taking my hand in his. You saved my life, he said quietly. Twice. Once at the market and again at the temple. You saved mine too, I replied. You could have let me fall crossing that river. Could have left me behind when the hunters came. Never. His fingers tightened on mine. From the moment you looked at me in that cage, from the moment you chose to see me instead of a monster, my life has been yours. Heat rose to my face. I'm just a seamstress, 25 years old with nothing to my name. You're the woman who gave everything for a stranger, who walked into darkness without hesitation, who bled for a cursed king. Those golden eyes held mine. You're extraordinary. Seraphine cleared her throat. I'll just check on the soup. She rose and moved to the fireplace, giving us privacy. What happens now? I asked Lucian. Thaddeus is gone, but there were 6 on the council. The others are being dealt with, Lucian said. I sent word to the High King's Council the moment you were stable. They're convening a tribunal in Greystone. The Council of 6 will answer for their crimes. And you, what will you do? He was quiet for a moment. Reclaim what was stolen. Rebuild what was broken. My people have been without their king for 3 years. They need me. Of course. I tried to smile, though something in my chest ached. You'll return to your territory, your throne. I will, he agreed. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out something small. A ring, simple silver with a black stone. But not alone, if you'll have me. My heart stopped. What? I'm not asking you to be my queen, not yet. That's too much too fast, and I won't trap you with titles and obligations. He turned my hand over, looking at the calluses from years of sewing, the scars from needle pricks. But I'm asking you to be my partner, my equal, to help me rebuild, to stand beside me as we create something better than what was. I don't know anything about ruling, I whispered, but you know about healing, about mercy, about seeing the person beneath the surface. His thumb traced circles on my palm. Those are the things a good ruler needs most. You barely know me. I know you spent your life savings to buy freedom for a stranger. I know you stitched my wounds with hands that had trembled but never stopped. I know you threw yourself between me and a crossbow bolt without hesitation. His voice roughened. I know enough. I looked at the ring, then at his face, at the hope and fear warring in those golden eyes. Partners, I said slowly. Equals. Always. I took the ring from his hand and slipped it onto my finger. Then yes. The smile that broke across his face was like sunrise. He leaned forward and pressed his forehead to mine, and I felt him trembling. Thank you, he whispered, for everything, for seeing me, for saving me, for choosing this. We stayed like that for a long moment, breathing together, learning the shape of this new thing between us. From the fireplace, Seraphine sniffed loudly. Soup's ready. And if you think I'm going to let you die of infection after all this drama, you're both mad. 6 months later, I stood in the great hall of Blackwood Keep and barely recognized my life. The hall was filled with people. Nobles and commoners alike gathered to witness justice. The High King's Justiciar, Lord Aldwyn Greymane, sat in judgment. Before him stood 5 men in chains, the Council of 6 minus Thaddeus, who remained in exile. I watched from beside Lucian's throne as the evidence was presented. Documents showing the theft of Blackwood lands, financial records proving embezzlement of city funds, testimony from witnesses about the murders they'd committed to hide their crimes. When it came time for me to speak, Lucian squeezed my hand once before I rose. The great hall fell silent as I approached the center. 800 eyes watched me. I was still weak, my shoulder bandaged beneath my dress, but I stood straight. I am Elspeth Thorne, I began, a seamstress, 25 years old. 3 weeks ago, I spent my life savings 300 gold coins to buy a wolf from the Market of the Damned. I gestured to the evidence table where the rusted cage sat as Exhibit 1. I didn't know that wolf was a king. I only knew he suffered. Lord Aldwyn leaned forward. Tell us what you discovered. I pulled out my grandmother's journal, its pages marked with her neat script. My grandmother wrote of wolf kings, of a curse that could trap them in animal form. She wrote that it required dark magic performed at a place of power. A clerk brought forward a map. I pointed to the temple's location. Lord Thaddeus Blackthorn found that place. He hired a dark mage, and 3 years ago he cursed Lucian Greythorn Blackwood, trapping him in wolf form, so he could claim the Blackwood territory and its silver mines. Lies, one of the council members shouted. This girl is clearly— Silence, Lord Aldwin commanded. He turned to Lucian. Your Majesty, present your evidence. Lucian stood. At a gesture, his warriors brought forward a wooden chest. From it, he pulled document after document. Financial records showing Thaddeus embezzled 500,000 gold coins from city funds. Land deeds forged with my seal, a seal I did not make, as I was trapped in animal form. And this, he held up a contract yellowed with age. Thaddeus's agreement with the dark mage Moraveth the Twisted. Payment 50,000 gold for one permanent transformation curse. Gasps rippled through the hall. We have more, Lucian continued. Seraphine stepped forward. 3 years ago, my husband refused to sell his cabin in Thornwood Forest. Thaddeus wanted it to hide the temple ritual site. 2 weeks later, my husband was dead. The physician said heart failure. She pulled out a vial, but I kept his medicine bottles. Last month, I tested them. Arsenic. The council member who'd shouted paled. Then another council member, an older man with white hair, stood shakily. I am Lord Cedric Ravenwood, and I can no longer stay silent. He reached into his cloak and pulled out a leather-bound journal. 3 years ago, Thaddeus approached me. He said the Wolf Kings were dangerous, that they hoarded resources, that removing them would benefit everyone. Cedric's hands trembled. I believed him. I helped fund the Dark Mage, but I didn't know. I didn't know the torture, the cow, the market. He opened the journal. Here is every meeting, every payment, every lie Thaddeus told us to gain support. He looked at Lucian. I deserve punishment. But please believe me, the curse was meant to be temporary. 1 year, he said, just to destabilize your claim. Then you'd be restored. Instead, he sold me like an animal, Lucian said quietly, and left me to die in the arena. Cedric dropped to his knees. Forgive me, Your Majesty. I was a fool. Lord Aldwin examined the journal, his expression grave. Then he stood and his staff struck the floor with a resounding boom. The Council of Six is found guilty of treason, conspiracy to murder, embezzlement, and the unlawful use of forbidden magic. Your titles are stripped. Your lands and wealth forfeit to the crown to be distributed as reparations to the victims' families. You are hereby banished from these territories forever. Should you return, the sentence is death. Guards move forward, chains rattling. Furthermore, Lord Aldwin continued, to prevent such corruption from taking root again, I decree the formation of an independent oversight committee. This committee will be comprised of 3 commoners elected by the people, 3 nobles elected by their peers, and 1 representative from the Wolf King territories. He looked at me. And I recommend Elspeth Thorne as the first commoner representative. The hall erupted in applause. I took Lucian's hand and rose, my face burning. But when I looked at him, I saw only pride and affection. Justice, not vengeance, and somehow that was enough. 1 year later, on the anniversary of the day I'd bought a wolf at the market of the Damned Luce and took me back to the temple. It had been cleaned, the dark stains scrubbed away. New carvings replaced the old ones, symbols of growth and healing instead of bondage and pain. In the center where the altar had stood, there was now a garden, silverleaf and comfrey and all the herbs my grandmother had taught me to use for healing. I wanted to transform it, Lucian said. Make it a place of life instead of death. It's beautiful. He turned to me and I saw nervousness in his face. This powerful king nervous. A year ago, I asked you to be my partner. You've exceeded every hope I had. The territory is healing because of you. Our people trust us because they trust you. He knelt in the garden surrounded by growing things. Now I'm asking for more. Elspeth Thorne, will you marry me? Will you be my queen? I thought about the girl I'd been a year ago. Poor, invisible, dreaming of a cottage where she could be alone. That girl would never have imagined this. A king kneeling before her, a territory calling her advisor, a future filled with purpose and partnership. But I wasn't that girl anymore. Yes, I said, 1,000 times yes. He slipped the ring onto my finger. Not the simple silver band from before, but something new. A circle of silver set with a black obsidian stone carved with the same runes that still glowed faintly on his skin. We were married 3 months later in a ceremony small and intimate. Just us and Seraphine and a few trusted friends. Under the full moon in the garden that had grown from the temple's ruins. And when Lucian kissed me, I swear I heard a wolf howling in approval. He still changes sometimes. The curse wasn't completely broken, just weakened. On nights when the moon is full and his emotions run high, the wolf emerges. But I'm not afraid. I curl up beside him, my fingers in his midnight fur, and I tell him stories until he falls asleep. And in the morning, he's human again, with my name on his lips and gratitude in his eyes. They say I was mad to spend 10 years of savings on a dying wolf. They're right, but sometimes madness is just courage that others don't understand. And courage, I've learned, is how we change the world. I stand beside my husband, my king, my partner, and I look out over the territory we're rebuilding together. A place where justice matters more than power, where mercy has equal weight to strength. A place where a poor seamstress and a cursed king created something beautiful from ashes. And I know with absolute certainty that I would make the same choice again, every time, forever.